Welcome back. So sorry that it's been so long. This is the longest gap between videos I've ever done. Um, the reason for that is that, as you may know, I put a lot of research into each movie, and I ended up putting a lot of effort into this movie called Point of Terror, which was released on Crown International Pictures. So I went back and somewhat unnecessarily watched all the Crown horror films ever from the late 50s all the way up to 1971. And then when I got to Point of Terror, I really didn't feel it was a horror film. So I had to start over. Then I was working up to this one, Sweet Sweet Rachel, which stars Stefanie Powers, who is also in Crescendo. And so then I decided that I would watch all of the good Stefanie Powers films, which was probably also unnecessary, although it did help me to appreciate this film on a better, deeper level. So, we're going to talk about Sweet Sweet Rachel, which was a TV movie on ABC that came out in October of 1971. I'm pretty sure that October is when ABC decided to put a horror movie out. They did the same thing 1 year before with The House That Would Not Die, which was pretty bad. And they also did one in November of 1970, which was called Crowhaven Farm. There's a video on each of those. You can go find them if you haven't seen them. So they didn't do another horror film until this one came out in October of 1971. It's called Sweet Sweet Rachel, featuring Stefanie Powers. Before we talk about the movie, let's take a look at some of the other Stefanie Powers movies that are worth a mention. She was not in any horror films before this, but she was in multiple thrillers. So here we have, let's see, this is Experiment in Terror, which is a fairly well-known film as far as 60s thrillers go. This is put out by Columbia Pictures. Obviously one of the Hollywood majors at the time. Experiment in Terror was okay. It was basically about a woman who works at a bank and she's called up by a criminal. Actually, I shouldn't say called up, but she's approached by a criminal in her own home. He basically says, "You're going to rob your bank or I'm going to kill you." And she goes and tells the police immediately. And I guess because it's 1962 that, like, the villain doesn't realize she told the police. And so she basically, basically the police just try and figure out who the criminal is for 2 hours. It's really slow. And Stefanie Powers is the main girl's little sister. The main woman is, the actress is Lee Remick. That was okay. I don't know. I didn't think it was that great. Then in 1965, we have Fnatic, which was really good. This is actually a Hammer film. Stefanie Powers is the main character of this one, and she's pretty good in it. And she is an American girl who now lives in England, and her ex dies. And so she goes to her ex's mother's house to pay her respects and, you know, say she's sorry. And the ex's mother, who is played by Tallulah Bankhead, who does a very good job, is a religious fanatic and basically decides that she needs to imprison Stefanie Powers' character so that she never has sex again, so that when she dies, she can return and be rejoined with her ex as a pure soul. Kind of ridiculous, but it was pretty good. Yeah, so that one's worth a watch. Fnatic, also known as Die, Die, My Darling in the United States. Okay, then in 1970, Stefanie Powers was in Crescendo, which I did a whole video on. This was a good one. Basically, this, I think, if I remember correctly, Stefanie Powers this time is an American grad student at a French university, and she goes to study about a master French composer. This one's good. Check out the video on that. Crescendo, also a Hammer film. And then after that, she was in this ABC movie of the week, Five Desperate Women, which was pretty bad. Basically about 5 women who were friends in college, and they have a reunion on a desert island, and there's a bad guy on the desert island that's trying to kill them. And there's actually 2 guys on the desert island, and you're not exactly sure which one is the killer, but there's only 2 of them, so there aren't that many options. And what's interesting, and I think what we should talk about here, is that sometimes there's a good actor that is good in no matter what they're in, and sometimes there is an actor or actress that can have their talents brought out by a good director. And Stefanie Powers is one of these people, because in Crescendo she is good, and in Fnatic she is good. But in Five Desperate Women she is not good. And in our feature, Sweet, Sweet Rachel, she is not that good. Sweet, Sweet Rachel is the wackiest out of all these movies, probably even wackier than Fnatic. In Sweet, Sweet Rachel, Stefanie Powers, at the beginning of the movie, her husband is killed because he thinks he sees her like outside this window, so he jumps through the window and ends up dying. Now that doesn't even make sense. But the whole movie is about psychics, and not only just psychics, but malicious psychics that can psychically harass others into doing horrible things like jump out a window. So this happens, and she kind of knows that there was some psychic mischief at play, I guess to call it. And so she goes to a supposed expert in ESP and tells him about it. And meanwhile, he and his blind colleague assistant have been like trying to hypnotize people. And so it turns out that someone was psychically harassing, that's the phrase they use, Stefanie Powers, who plays Rachel's husband, to the point where he killed himself. And later the same unknown person, because this is also a mystery, psychically influences the ESP expert in one of the better scenes of the movie to pull his car over and open up the gas tank and drop lit matches into the gas tank, which, believe it or not, does not explode the gas tank. I assume because the matches were like putting themselves out on the descent, although that is not clear. His blind assistant had to stop him. The whole thing is kind of ridiculous. Another really ridiculous scene, which is probably my favorite scene, is like this point where Rachel thinks that her ex-husband is coming back to contact her through a porcelain head, and the porcelain head talks to her, and she takes it and smashes it on the floor. It's not very good. I would give it a 4 out of 10. Other than the porcelain head thing, that part was interesting. Other than that, like, it's not super coherent. It's not super interesting. The acting is relatively bad, although the guy who plays the ESP expert, which was Alex Dreyer, he was kind of good in it. And his assistant, the blind assistant who can hypnotize people, sort of, they hypnotize someone remotely. Like, that's not even in the same building or anything. That guy was pretty good, and he's not even credited in the movie, as far as I could tell. No credit on that guy. They both had really nice voices. Those 2 men had like voices that like kind of stuck out, kind of like how Vincent Price's voice like really catches you. Theirs were both like that. Stephanie Powers wasn't very good in it, and like she's barely in the second half of the movie, which is kind of weird because she's obviously on the promo front and center right here. Also, Brenda Scott is in this movie. She plays Rachel's cousin, And Brenda Scott was the main female character in Simon, King of the Witches. Although she has such a tiny role here, it's almost not worth mentioning. But she was in it. And the guy that plays Brenda Scott's father is in like almost all the Batman movies as like a minor role. He was in like 4 of the Batman movies, like the older Batman movies, not the like the 80s Batman, like when like whoever, the first 4, not the first 4, but the Batman Returns, Batman and Robin, those ones. The 90s, 80s, 90s Batman movies. He was in like all of those. Anyway, overall, unfortunately, this is not really worth the wait. I think it's been over 3 weeks since I put a video up, like 3.5 weeks. Sorry about that. I really try and put one up a week, but I got messed up this time around. The next 2 movies, I've already done the pre-research on, so they should be coming out in a timely fashion, hopefully. So that's it. An ABC TV movie, it's not going to be that good. It's a TV movie from the early 70s. All right, we'll see you next time.